New York City, the afternoon of January the 7th, 2020. Breaking news. About 24 ballistic missiles hit United States facilities in Iraq. More specifically, the targets were military bases in western Iraq, where hundreds of American soldiers are deployed. This was the escalation of the latest tension between Iran and the United States that had erupted on January the 3rd. On that day, the US Army launched a deadly strike against a convoy that was leaving Baghdad Airport. Traveling in that convoy were two leading figures of Middle Eastern geopolitics. The first was Qasem Soleimani, the commander of the Quds Force, a special operations group within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. He was one of the most important leaders of the Iranian theocracy. Next to him was Aby Mahdi al-Muhandis, chief of the Kata'ib Hezbollah, or Hezbollah Brigades, Iraqi militia founded in 2003 in order to fight US troops deployed in the country. According to the Pentagon, this deadly strike was carried out according to orders given by Donald Trump himself, the President of the United States. Now the question is, who was Qasem Soleimani? What does the loss mean to Middle Eastern politics? Why did Trump decide to end his life? Why and how is Iran reacting to this? And the most important question of all, what could happen next? Are we about to witness a war between the United States and Iran? Well, let's take a look. First of all, Soleimani was not a random person, but one of the main characters in Iranian politics. From the perspective of the West, we could say he is the Joker, the Darth Vader, and the Hans Landa of international politics. Yes, dear viewer, Qasem Soleimani was the most important military leader in Iran and perhaps the second most powerful leader in the country, only surpassed by the supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei. As we've discussed before here on VisualPolitik, Iran is one of the US's arch-enemies, so you can imagine the magnitude of this man. But in order to understand who Mr. Soleimani really was, we have to understand how the Iranian army actually works. Unlike most countries, Iran doesn't have one army, but two. Yep, two different armies that work completely independently of each other. On the one hand, we have a regular army that has more than 350,000 soldiers. According to Article 143 of the Iranian Constitution, this army has the classic tasks every army has: protecting the land, the borders, securing infrastructure, and so on. But then we have this other army, the so-called Islamic Revolutionary Guard. Well, this army was created in 1979, right after the revolution started by Ayatollah Khamenei. Its main task is to defend the ideological principles of the revolution. So, why would they need such a thing? Well, think about it. After the revolution, Khamenei was afraid of a coup d'etat rising from the traditional army that had always been loyal to the Shah of Persia prior to the revolution. So in order to quash any would-be coup, he created his own guard. But if you thought this was just a small troop of elite bodyguards protecting religious leaders, well, you better think again. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard has around 150,000 troops, and they have far superior training and weaponry than the regular army. But hold on for just a second, because that isn't all. These troops don't answer to the government, but are under the exclusive command of the supreme leader. In other words, Hassan Rouhani, the Iranian president, has no power over them. Only the Ayatollah Khamenei does. Having said that, within this Islamic Revolutionary Guard, there is another corps with greater autonomy, and those are the Quds Force. The Quds Force is similar to a cross between the CIA and Special Forces in the United States. This means that they are elite troops and an intelligence agency at the same time. They carry out all foreign operations. In other words, the best trained soldiers and the smartest spies from throughout Iran belong to this group. The Quds Force are in charge of expanding Iran's influence abroad. And these were the troops led by Mr. Soleimani. This is why we say that this man was the architect of Iran's sphere of influence in the Middle East. And lately, Iran has been gaining a huge sway on the region. Over time, this man came to be in charge of all Iranian regional policy. Add to this his intelligence network and his closeness to the supreme leader, and you can understand why Soleimani was far more important to Iranian politics than the president himself. Want to see an example of this? Well, what do you think Khamenei called him? General? Commander-in-Chief? No. His official title translates to Living Martyr of the Revolution. And the truth is, when it comes to expanding Iran's influence and causing problems for American troops, Soleimani knew his stuff. Just have a look at how some high-ranking men in Washington describe him.
For 2 decades, Soleimani has been the most powerful, savvy, and effective terrorist on the planet. He's enjoyed full backing of a powerful terrorist state. He is irreplaceable. Mark Dubowitz, Chief Executive of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies.
As the Quds Force leader, Soleimani created a multinational network that has become a headache for both the US and Israel. After the Iraq invasion of 2003, the Quds Force trained and gave weapons to militias that hit US targets. For example, they trained small militias in the use of sophisticated explosives that perforate the shields of the armored vehicles used by US troops. These kinds of explosives caused hundreds of US soldiers to lose their lives. Those militias now have thousands of troops who are fighting for total control of Iraq. And the same goes for Afghanistan. There, Iranian troops gave training, weapons, and even direct support to the Taliban so that they could fight the international forces that were led by the United States. But if you're not impressed by Mr. Soleimani's track record, hold on a second, because there's more. In 2006, his support to Hezbollah, a pro-Iranian terrorist group in Lebanon, brought about the first retreat of the Israeli army. Later on, in Syria, his support to the al-Assad regime was crucial for enabling the dictator to keep his power. But it doesn't end there. In Yemen, pro-Iranian militias have managed to hold their own against the almighty Saudi army. The same goes for the Gaza Strip, where the Quds Force is playing a key role in helping Hamas. Still not surprised? Well, look at operations like this one.
September 14th, 2019. 2 major Saudi oil installations hit by drone strike. US blames Iran. New York Times. July 20th, 2019. Iran seizes British tanker in Strait of Hormuz. BBC.
In a nutshell, Soleimani's loss has been a huge blow to the Ayatollah regime. The American drone not only killed a key Iranian figure, it also brought massive humiliation to the whole regime. Because, let's be honest here, if a US drone can take out the leader of your best elite troop, a lot of people are gonna stop being afraid of Iran.
It is impossible to overstate the importance of this particular action. It is more significant than the killing of Osama bin Laden or even the death of Islamic State leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. General David Petraeus, former commander of US Armed Forces in Iraq and Afghanistan and a former CIA director.
So, okay, I know what you're probably now thinking, and that's that, well, this is a great achievement for the US, right? Well, yeah, and in a way that's correct, but on the other hand, it also comes with a huge risk. Killing this man would not come without retaliation. This brings us to the next question. Why did Trump decide to carry out the attack? Why did he want to unleash such a political and diplomatic crisis at this point in time? Well, let's take a closer look.
Last night, at my direction, the United States military successfully executed a flawless precision strike that killed the #1 terrorist anywhere in the world, Qasem Soleimani.
The keys behind Trump's decision.
Let's be clear here. Washington always hated this guy and wanted to kill him. No matter if we talk about Trump, Obama, or even Bush, all of them had Soleimani on their hit lists. But until now, nobody has wanted to risk so much for him. So then why did Trump want this? I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking, well, it's just good old Donald doing his thing. Trump just got crazy and basically said, whatever, let's go and kill him. But that's actually not what happened. In fact, there are 3 reasons that explain why Trump acted. The first one is the Iraq situation. Iraq has never been stable, but now it's getting even worse. For several months, there has been a massive fight between pro-Iranian and anti-Iranian supporters, so Iran is pushing their effort to control the region. This is why the militias trained in Iran have been harassing any opposing forces, including US troops. They just want every US soldier to leave the country. This explains the many attacks on US military bases and the attempted assault of the US embassy.
Thousands of protesters attacked the American embassy in Baghdad, shouting "Death to USA." El Mundo.
It seems that Soleimani had gone to Baghdad to coordinate massive attacks against the US military presence there and to take over the Iraqi political institutions.
Soleimani was plotting imminent and sinister attacks on American diplomats and military personnel, but we caught him in the act and terminated him. We took action last night to stop a war. We did not take action to start a war.
But hold on a second, because there is a second reason, and this is related to this year, 2020, the year of the US presidential elections. And what would be better for Trump than taking out one of his arch-enemies? Add to this the fact that Trump needs to divert attention from the impeachment process and his lack of achievements on foreign policy. A victory in the Middle East would be a godsend for his campaign. And yet, there's also a third reason. You see, ever since Trump came to the White House, he has increased pressure on Iran. His goal is to put the Ayatollah regime against the wall and hopefully spark a change of regime. This explains breaking the nuclear deal and the nuclear sanctions against the country.
In a few moments, I'll be signing an executive order imposing hard-hitting sanctions on the Supreme Leader of Iran and the Office of the Supreme Leader of Iran and many others.
So far, neither of these has worked, so he's had to take a further step. Besides, with this operation, the United States scares off their opponents because they flex their muscle in the region. But the real question now is, what's going to happen next? Are we really about to start a war with the Middle East? Well, let's see.
Revenge.
Iran has sworn they will retaliate, and we could say that the regime is in shock.
Severe revenge awaits the criminals who have stained their hands with his and the other martyrs' blood last night. Martyr Soleimani is an international figure of resistance, and all such people will seek revenge. Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. There's no doubt that the great nation of Iran and the other free nations of the region will take revenge for this gruesome crime from criminal America. Hassan Rouhani, President of Iran.
The first retaliation was launching at least 24 ballistic missiles against 2 US military bases, Arbil and Al-Assad. Now the question is, does this mean that the Ayatollahs are willing to start a war against the United States? Of course, we can't predict what's in Khamenei's head, but from a strictly rational point of view, it makes absolutely no sense. Revenge is one thing, suicide is another. And we're not just talking about military capability here. Think about it. Anyone could predict that Iran would avenge their dead general. It was just a fact. The regime needed to respond to the US strike. The question is, how?
The Islamic Republic of Iran refuses to take any emotional and hasty action. We will set up a plan, patiently, to respond to this terrorist act in a crushing and powerful manner. We are the ones who set the time and place of our reciprocal response. Brigadier General Abulfazl Shekarchi, a spokesman for the Iranian Armed Forces.
Sure, they have sent more than 24 ballistic missiles and they've set off alarm bells around the globe, but was it as big a deal as it seemed? At the time of making this video, the Iranian missiles had struck 2 second-tier US facilities and no Americans had been killed. This meant the Islamic Revolutionary Guard chose 2 minor targets to save face as a show of power inside Iran and to create chaos within neighboring Iraq. At the same time, they have reduced the risk of counter-retaliation from the United States. In other words, they are increasing the tension for a moment in order to reduce it later on. So does this mean the escalation has stopped? Well, of course not, especially not in Iran. You see, Iran is famous for fighting without declaring war. They won't send uniformed men, no tanks, or combat jets as you might expect in a traditional war. The ultimate Iranian speciality is what we call asymmetric warfare. This means informal attacks carried out by groups that, although supported by Iran, are not Iran. In fact, these kinds of strategies were Soleimani's speciality. This is something that the Ayatollah regime has been doing forever. For example, in 1983, Hezbollah bombed a Marine Corps quarter in Lebanon, causing more than 200 deaths. The same happened when Hezbollah attacked the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires and the biggest Jewish center in Argentina in 1992. We don't even have to go that far back in time. The Iraqi militias that have been fighting US soldiers in Iraq caused more than 600 deaths, and let's not even mention Afghanistan. During 2019, pro-Iranian groups hit a US drone and harassed oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. Also, the Houthi rebels attacked 2 of the most important Saudi oil facilities. This is straight from the playbook of the Quds Force, and we can expect more of this in the future.
It's a huge threat. The fact that we have F-16s and F-35s is not relevant to this problem. Retired Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser, former chief of the research division at the Israeli Defense Forces military intelligence branch.
And it is hard to imagine a different scenario, even if the Islamic Revolutionary Guard did dare to launch these ballistic missiles. Basically, they couldn't do anything else because they have no better weapons for it. Here are some examples. The most powerful tank Iran has is the Russian T-72 that started operating in the 1970s. And this is the most powerful because they still use tanks from Vietnam or even the Korean War. The air fleet is even older. Of course, it all depends on what the United States does. But the truth is, the US wouldn't be interested in invading Iran either. We're talking about a huge country with hundreds of thousands of soldiers ready for battle and a high-end anti-air system. Despite the fact they only have short-range and medium-range missiles and therefore couldn't attack US soil, they could cause significant damage to US allies like Israel, Saudi Arabia, or the United Arab Emirates. So unless there is a big surprise, all we can expect is a lot of tension and a lot of asymmetric warfare. But now it's your turn. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think, despite all of our reasoning, there will be a war between the United States and Iran? Well, please leave your answer in the comment section below. Also, don't forget to check out reconsidermedia.com, the podcast that provided the voices in this episode that were not mine. Also, we publish brand new videos every week, so please do subscribe to this channel and hit that bell button so you won't miss any posts. And if you like this video, please do give us a thumbs up. And as always, I'll see you next time.
And if you want to learn more about politics and hear even more of my lovely voice, you can join us at Reconsider Media. We have a podcast at reconsidermedia.com/podcast. See you there.